Suge Knight, was one of the most intimidating and sometimes straight-up terrifying men in the rap game. The co-founder of Death Row Records did whatever it took to make sure he always came out on top, even if it meant intimidating and threatening artists and other people in the industry. Almost everyone backed down to Suge Knight when he pulled up with his thug. Almost everyone. A handful of rappers had either dealt with men like Suge in the past or just weren't scared of him when he tried to bully them into getting what he wanted. Eazy-E. Eazy-E Eric Lynn Wright was considered the godfather of gangster rap, and with good reason. Not only did he play a huge role in making rap one of the hottest music genres in the world, but he also led the West Coast scene as the leader of the NWA. The group was formed in 1987 after he collaborated with Dr. Dre, more on him later, and Ice Cube on several tracks. Ironically, he played a pretty big role in the birth of Death Row Records as well. Back in 1986, a year before forming the NWA, Eazy-E founded Ruthless Records alongside Jerry Heller, one of the most controversial yet highly regarded managers in the business. In addition to the NWA, Heller's roster of clients included Marvin Gaye, Black Sabbath, and The Who, and that's just barely scratching the surface. Heller may have had one of the most iconic client lists of all time, but it was his involvement in Ruthless Records that ultimately pushed Ice Cube and Dr. Dre out the door, leading to a heated feud between Eazy-E and his former friends. In interviews, Dre stated that once Heller got involved in the group, he decided to create a rift between all three men to divide and conquer. He chose to focus on Eazy-E, while Dre and Cube were left out in the cold. To make matters worse, E didn't really seem to care. Both Dre and Cube repeatedly got shafted when it came to getting paid, while Heller and Eazy-E kept making bank. Ice Cube was the first of the two men to leave, starting a run as a solo artist, and eventually becoming a pretty big movie star as well. Dre stuck it out for a couple of years, but eventually Suge Knight got involved because he wanted to make a major move in the industry. He managed to take a look at Ruthless Records' financial records, and pretty soon, it became obvious that Dre was getting screwed over. So he decided to leave Ruthless Records, but there was one problem. Eazy-E wasn't interested in letting him out of his contract. It was this situation that led to the first major altercation between E and Suge Knight. Had pretty much convinced Dre to join him and form Death Row, and the leader of the NWA was the only man standing in his way. Suge eventually got what he wanted, and E let Dre out of his contract, but he did not do it out of the goodness of his heart. Though he did willingly meet Suge without any fear, multiple accounts have said that Suge Knight essentially pulled up with a couple of his thugs and some lead pipes. There was also the crazy rumor that Suge handed E a piece of paper that had his mother's address on it. Regardless, E got the message loud and clear and decided all of this wasn't worth the trouble. This was classic Suge, using physical intimidation and threats of violence to get what he wanted. But this was also the first indication that E was not scared of Suge Knight, and heading into the mid-90s, both men struck up a shaky mutual respect for each other, primarily due to E's association with the Mexicans in LA. Around this time, even though Dre was doing his own thing, Eazy-E was getting a piece of the pie because he still retained the rights to anything Dre produced. Suge didn't want money going out of Death Row and into E's pocket, but he could not do much about it. Around 1993, E reached out to his high school classmate, Gilbert Izquierdo, also known to fans as Toker, about setting up a Latino version of the NWA. He was influential in the rise of Chicano rap, which often faced the same criticism as E's music. People were critical because it promoted violence and the gangster lifestyle. But even beyond that, both groups created music that covered similar subjects, criticizing government and law enforcement agencies with strong political connotations. Taking it one step further, Eazy-E's fashion sense was also influenced by Latin American culture, and he celebrated the lowrider presence in LA, again something that's closely associated with the Latin Americans. It was these groups that truly ruled the streets of Los Angeles, and all of them were very closely aligned with Eazy-E, who could enter parts of California Suge would have steered clear of. This not only meant that Suge knew exactly where to toe the line, but E also understood that Suge would not be foolish enough to try and cross him. Dr. Dre and Suge Knight have had a pretty complicated relationship over the years, and it is mainly down to everything that happened between them at Ruthless and Death Row Records. Like I already mentioned earlier, was instrumental in getting Dre out of his contract with Ruthless Records, but the only reason he did it was to form a label of his own. Once that happened, Death Row took off. Not only was Dre at the top of his game, but he was producing banger after banger alongside Snoop Dogg under the Death Row label. When Dre dropped The Chronic, he pretty much changed the game. The album went triple platinum and was Death Row's first major commercial and critical success. More than that though, it put Snoop on the map, and he would eventually have his own run-ins with Suge, but I'll come back to that in a bit. Dre used The Chronic as an opportunity to go go after Eazy-E and Ruthless for everything they had put him through, announcing to the world that Death Row was a force to be reckoned with on the West Coast. Everything was going pretty great for a while, but there was one big problem. Suge Knight couldn't resist getting into trouble, having a very public feud with Puff Daddy, and spending more time in prison than outside of it. Over time, fewer artists wanted to be associated with the label because of Suge's reputation. In the mid-90s, Suge went on to sign Tupac to the label, which should have made Death Row pretty much untouchable, when you consider the fact that they also had Dre and Snoop on the roster. Tupac and Dre collaborated on California Love, which went on to top the Billboard Top 100, which was a first for both men. Unfortunately, during this time, Dre was becoming increasingly concerned with the way Suge was behaving. Sure, everyone always knew he was a huge bully, but Dre ended up leaving over contract disputes, which was probably just code for Suge is screwing me over, just like Eazy and Heller did. To make matters even worse, Tupac was acting a lot like Suge had been, beefing with one rapper after another, further hurting Death Row's perception. In 1996, Dre left Death Row and formed Aftermath Entertainment. Now let's jump forward in time a little bit. Over the course of about the next 10 years, Suge Knight was in and out of prison, as Death Row Records lost whatever little influence it had in the industry, especially after Tupac's death. A few years later, Suge Knight was shot 6 times at a club in August 2014. He was able to walk long enough to get into the ambulance but needed surgery. Just a few months later, Suge pulled up to the Straight Outta Compton set, allegedly to meet with Dr. Dre. Most reports suggest that he was either unhappy with how he was being portrayed in the movie, or he wanted to be paid for his likeness being used in the film. That didn't happen. All he did, though, was run over 2 men, with CCTV footage of the incident making it seem like it was intentional. Now this is where things start to get a little crazy. Suge went to prison, but he claimed that Dr. Dre was the man behind the hit at the club. He even testified in court that the police told him Dre was behind everything. In 2016, Suge Knight threatened to sue Dre, Universal Music, and Apple for $300 million, stating that they all colluded to try and have him killed. Dre obviously denied the absolutely insane accusation, with his lawyer stating, given that Dre has had zero interaction with Suge since leaving Death Row Records in 1996, we hope that Suge's lawyer has lots of malicious prosecution insurance. Suge Knight didn't drop it though. As a matter of fact, he took a completely different approach in a 2018 testimony. He stated that he just happened to be driving near the set and someone told him to drop by and meet with Dre. If Suge is to be believed, he had the noblest intentions behind the visit. He testified, Dr. Dre, we've been really good friends for years. Matter of fact, I know his kids, he knows my kids. And I was told that he had paid some guys to harm me. I didn't believe it because authorities do lie. So I went up there. I was going to talk to him and say, hey man, I'm not going to react to what authorities say about you having something to do with me getting shot or paid somebody to get me killed. I just want to make you aware they are saying this and putting it out there. That testimony included a bunch of other stuff that saw Suge contradict himself on more than one occasion. Regardless of what actually went down between both men, these encounters made it obvious that Dre wasn't scared of Suge at all. He just wanted nothing to do with him. 50 Cent. 50 Cent probably had one of the greatest debuts of all time. Heading into 2003, with his first album Get Rich or Die Trying, he had already established himself as the next big name in the rap game. If 50 had signed with any other record label, then he may have never crossed paths with Suge Knight, but he had signed with Dr. Dre's label, Aftermath Entertainment. Suge had been in prison till around 2001, which meant that when he got out, everyone was talking about the new guy on the block, and Suge wanted to do what Suge does, bully him. But the thing is, 50 wasn't like most rappers. Sure, a lot of them came from troubled backgrounds, but 50 had been shot multiple times and left for dead, but he bounced back. He was respected and had a fearsome reputation of his own, to the extent that when he signed with Aftermath, the entire crew started moving around in bulletproof cars with bulletproof vests on. Anything could go down with 50 on the roster. For some reason, Suge was allegedly under the impression that Dre had brought in 50 Cent to take him out, so he thought it might be best to strike first. While 50 was shooting the music video for In Da Club, Suge pulled up to the set with about 30 of his men, unannounced. Most men would have immediately back down, but 50 is not like most men. Even though his entourage had pretty much disappeared, he stepped right up to Suge and his goons and asked him what he wanted. Suge understood that this was not a man who was going to be intimidated, so he reportedly just took a puff of his cigar and left, and 50 just went back to shooting his music video like nothing had happened. At this point, it is important to remember that Suge had been in prison for a while, and he had run Death Row Records into the ground. His influence in the industry had been waning, and 50 Cent represented the new generation who would not give in to his intimidation tactics. When you combine all of this with the fact that 50 also allegedly chased off Suge with an Uzi, you get a picture of a man who wasn't scared of Suge Knight, or anyone at all for that matter. Getting shot 9 times and surviving will do that for you. While these encounters were pretty insane on their own, the timing of them also proved that a failure to intimidate 50 Cent saw Suge unravel over the next few years. If you thought he was unhinged before, you've got another thing coming. In 2003, Suge was arrested because he hit a parking lot attendant, which was a clear violation of his parole. That one moment of stupidity stupidity not only landed him back in prison, but also saw Death Row continue to hemorrhage money at an insane pace. In the years that followed, Suge didn't even bother trying to get Death Row back on top. Instead, all he did was stir up beef with anyone and everyone while his record label died a slow death. He alienated whatever few friends he had left and pretty much guaranteed that no talented artist would sign with Death Row. The crazy thing about 50 Cent not backing down from Suge Knight is that it was probably the final nail in the coffin, because it seemed to kill what little credibility or relevance Suge still had left in the industry. 50 was never scared of Suge, and that was pivotal in ruining the co-founder of Death Row. The decline was steep as both Suge and Death Row Records filed for bankruptcy in 2006. Eminem. Before 50 Cent arrived on the scene, Dr. Dre signed Eminem to his label after being urged by the head of Interscope, Jimmy Iovine. Dre immediately recognized the raw talent in M and turned him into a star at Aftermath Entertainment. Eminem had been around for a while, but he didn't get Iovine's attention until he released the Slim Shady EP. Just for your reference, an EP, or an extended play, has more than one track, but not enough to be called an LP. The cool thing about the Slim Shady alter ego was that it allowed M to tap into a darker side of himself, which was reflected in his lyrics and really helped him stand out. The Slim Shady LP was Eminem's first major album and was a massive success. It was certified quadruple platinum and debuted in the second spot on the Billboard Top 200, making it the first massive success for Aftermath Entertainment. All of this meant that Suge Knight had two reasons to target Eminem. Firstly, he was Dr. Dre's first major signing at Aftermath, and you already know that by this point, Suge had mad beef with Dr. Dre. Secondly, the huge success of the Slim Shady LP meant that Aftermath was gaining notoriety and capturing massive audiences that at some point would have belonged to Death Row Records. According to Byron Big Naz Williams, Suge tried to have Eminem killed twice. The first incident took place at the Source Hip Hop Awards in 2001. Big Naz stated that the seating arrangement at the event was designed to separate artists from their bodyguards so that the musicians could network with each other without their heavies hovering behind them. Naz remembered noticing that M was beefing with a bunch of guys in red shirts who stated that Suge had sent them to take the rapper down. Odds are that these men were Bloods, because everyone knew Suge was involved with the mob Piru Bloods, with some gang members even working for Death Row Records when he was in control. Naz immediately got involved to protect Eminem. He said, "I had to snatch him up. I had to call Dre and his bodyguards and tell them what was going on. Long story short, we ended up going backstage. Eminem did his presentation, and we had to watch out for guys backstage. So I pretty much had to have him stand behind me, and I just had to be on knockout mode, man." Luckily for everyone involved, the situation did not escalate. The second time Suge went after Eminem, the rapper had just flown into Honolulu alongside Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. Big Naz was there to see this go down as well. He said, "When the plane lands, we are greeted by 20 Honolulu police officers, and they told us that Death Row is here." Suge Knight had sent 50 guys to try to break up the show. When we got there, vacation mode was over. We were locking and loading, putting on bulletproof vests with their wives and girlfriends sitting next to them. These two instances would have been more than enough to scare off most rappers, but Eminem was not going to let himself be intimidated by Suge Knight. Do you remember how Suge had pulled up to confront 50 Cent when he was filming the video for In Day Club? Well, when that happened, Eminem was more than ready to stand against Suge and his thugs. G-Unit's Bang'em Smurf was the one who got the call about Suge's arrival when he was getting his hair cut and smoking a little green. He immediately headed inside to let everyone know. Smurf also had his crew from Connecticut with him, and they were ready to step up if anything went down, and they would have had a little company. Smurf said, "Eminem came back with the vest. Eminem was outside with them. Dre wasn't outside, 50 wasn't outside, but Eminem was outside. I guess they had to protect their breadwinner. Eminem put on his vest and ran back outside with us. Shout out to Eminem." I've already spoken about how Dr. Dre and 50 Cent weren't scared of Suge, but they didn't go outside to see him. Eminem did. Despite Suge's trying to kill on at least 2 occasions that we know of, the real Slim Shady didn't think twice about stepping up to him. Tupac. Of everyone on this list, Tupac was the only man who stuck by Suge no matter what, but doing that ultimately played a role in his untimely death. Back in 1995, Tupac went to prison on sexual abuse charges, with bail set at well over $1 million, an amount that the rapper had absolutely no way of paying. This was when Suge stepped in. He went up to Tupac and offered to pay his bail and get him out of prison ASAP. There was a condition, of course, there always was one with Suge. He ensured the rapper would sign with his label after he posted bail, and exactly what happened. But it wasn't just the money that convinced Tupac to sign with Death Row. There were a couple of other factors at play. Firstly, he was convinced that the East Coast was out to get him, and his meeting with Suge timed up nicely with Suge publicly dissing Puff Daddy. Secondly, there was a big part of Tupac that loved the gangster lifestyle, and rolling with Suge would give him a level of notoriety he never experienced before. After Dr. Dre left Death Row, he made an enemy out of Tupac, who had now become the crowning jewel of the record label. Just a few months later, Tupac headed to Vegas with Suge to watch the Selden vs. Tyson boxing match. After the match around 11 p.m., a white Cadillac pulled up to Tupac at Las Vegas Boulevard and opened fire. The rapper was shot 4 times and died as a result of his injuries 6 days later on September 13, 1996. Before Tupac had headed out of the MGM Grand after the match, someone from his crew had spotted Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, who was affiliated with the Crips. Considering the fact that Suge had been long associated with the Bloods, everyone in their entourage jumped Anderson and beat him down. Years after Tupac's death, an investigative journalist wrote an article for the Los Angeles Times stating that Anderson had been the one who killed Tupac, while also alleging that Biggie Smalls had been involved in orchestrating the hit, alongside members of the New York underworld. This report had a couple of problems though. Firstly, Biggie had an airtight alibi, so he could not have been involved. Secondly, the police reportedly failed to question Anderson at length before he was killed in an unrelated shooting soon after Tupac's death. This is where things get interesting though. It is obvious to all of us that Tupac was not scared of Suge Knight. Suge got him out of prison and Tupac stood by him and was loyal to a fault when Dre left death row. But with no clear answer in sight, theories accusing Suge Knight of killing Tupac began popping up. It was alleged that Suge took Tupac out so he wouldn't be able to sign with another label once he was done with death row. Tupac had a 3-album contract with the record label when he got out of prison, and he started by releasing rap's first ever double disc release in early 1996. This meant that Tupac would only have to release another album before he would be free to sign with whoever he wanted. We also have to remember that Suge eventually made money from Tupac's death by releasing posthumous albums under the Death Row label. So this theory might seem far-fetched at first glance, but it hardly seems that crazy when you really think about it, especially when you consider the fact that several former Death Row artists believe Suge was behind it all. This goes a step further though, because in March 1997, Biggie was killed in a very similar drive-by shooting when he was in Los Angeles. Pretty much everyone assumed that it was a revenge killing. After all, Biggie was Tupac's main rival and was suspected of getting him killed. But if we stick with this theory, Suge taking him out still makes a lot of sense, by making everyone believe that it was a revenge killing. No one would think that maybe Suge was behind Tupac's death too. There's an entire conspiracy made up around all of this involving crooked cops and former Death Row associates. But one thing remains clear. Regardless of whether Suge was involved in Tupac's death, Tupac never feared him, but saw him as a close ally. Snoop Dogg. Today, most people recognize Snoop Dogg for his show with Martha Stewart or his random appearances in the WWE. But real fans know that Snoop was as hard as they got, was on trial for murder, and ran with a dangerous crowd as well. In 1992, Death Row discovered Snoop Dogg, who immediately stood out because of his storytelling abilities, fondness for spitting bars, and just being a laid-back, fun person to be around. When Dr. Dre dropped The Chronic, the album heavily featured Snoop on its tracks, and he immediately skyrocketed to fame. In the years that followed, Snoop continued delivering one great track after another, but ultimately ended up leaving the label due to contract issues, just like Dr. Dre before him. Before this happened, things were probably fine between Snoop and Suge Knight, but after Dre formed Aftermath Entertainment, Snoop leaving Death Row to join Master P's No Limit Records in 1998 was a huge betrayal. In an interview, Snoop recounted the fact that Suge threatened his life while he was sitting in prison. He said, "The threatened my life when he was in jail. Tried to get at me at concerts. They put my address on a tape. He was going to give a Benz if a cut my hair." Snoop did not take these threats lying down. As a matter of fact, when Suge got out of prison in 2001, Snoop made it a point to diss him in his music. He was absolutely furious and did not care about Suge's reputation or his association with the Bloods. As a matter of fact, Snoop was allegedly worried that he would have to take Suge out just to put this matter to bed. Sometime after this, Snoop had a run-in with Suge at the BET Awards, and he noted that Suge was scared of him, signaling a clear shift in the balance of power. Snoop had openly dissed him in public, and Suge had not been able to do a thing in response. Snoop also explicitly stated that he never feared Suge, saying, "Never was afraid of him. I was afraid I was going to have to kill him. That's what I was afraid of." He also stated that the only reason the beef between both men didn't escalate to murder was that his friend, a pimp turned man of religion, ensured he kept a level head at all times. Snoop Dogg got the last laugh, as while Suge was rotting away in prison, Snoop bought Death Row Records in early 2022. The fact that he now owned the label that launched his career but was run into the ground by Suge was just a beautiful bit of karma. Unsurprisingly, Suge isn't happy about this news at all, as he has alleged that Snoop took control of the company illegally and that ownership of the label's most popular and profitable releases will eventually be returned to him. It is a far-fetched claim at best, but it goes to show just how effectively Snoop got under Suge's skin. Snoop has made his dislike of Suge very well known, and while he may never openly admit it, the fact that he never explicitly states he doesn't think Suge killed Tupac is telling. Snoop Dogg's dislike or lack of respect goes back years. When Suge was handed a 9-year sentence for violating his parole, role, Snoop didn't have many comforting words for the music mogul. He said, "When you get that kind of power, you gotta treat people right, so when you get in a down situation, it'll be more favorable for you." It's like the minute he got locked up, everyone was like, "Damn, I'm glad he got locked up." If you got the power, why not try to make some of these people your friends, as opposed to making everybody really scared of you? Snoop Dogg remains one of the few people in the world who not only openly criticized and dissed Suge Knight, but also built enough clout to flip the script and have Suge be scared of him instead. Master P. While it didn't have the notoriety Death Row Records did, Master P's No Limit Records built a strong reputation itself by operating with a talented roster that consistently churned out good music. Master P believes that his legacy greatly differs from Suge's. While Suge ruled over everyone through fear and bullying, P claims that he ran No Limit with the intention of actually caring for the artists signed to his label and ensuring they did the best they could. The fact that Master P pretty much saved Snoop Dogg's life is just proof of that fact. I've already spoken about just how mad Snoop was at Suge and Death Row Records. He went to the extent of planning to release an album called Death Row, where he would have dissed pretty much everyone still associated with the label. Considering Suge's reputation and the people he ran with, releasing the album would have pretty much been a death sentence. Snoop was in a bad place at this point, as he admitted that Death Row had broken his spirit. In later interviews, he said, "They broke me, man. They broke my spirit. Look, Doggy Style, working on Dogfather, win my murder case, Dre leaves, Tupac get killed, Suge going to jail, Death Row wanna kill me. That's all in the same year." But Master P intervened and convinced Snoop to drop the idea. Snoop eventually joined Master P's label and understood what it meant to be managed by a decent person and not a thug. He specifically mentioned how everything he did at Death Row was in Suge's name. But with No Limit, he got at least a measure of ownership over his work. We know that Suge was furious with Snoop when he joined No Limit, but Master P could not have cared less about Suge's fury. As a matter of fact, he even went down to the prison to meet with Suge and paid him off to let Snoop out of his contract at Death Row Records. He was willing to do whatever was necessary to get Snoop out. Master P had never been intimidated by Suge or his tactics. In an interview, he once shared that Suge told him California wasn't big enough for both of them. So Master P asked Suge when he was moving out because he'd already bought a house. Despite everything that has gone down with Suge over the years, Master P still doesn't hold any ill will towards him. In an interview, he said, "He opened up a lot of doors for a lot of people, and I just pray that God change his heart and let him know that he can help people even with being incarcerated. He can help more people. I just hope he find God in there if he don't already have, so we can get on another page." The fact that Master P was always focused on doing right by his people meant that he could never really be swayed by Suge Knight's tactics. If anything, P sees Suge as a misguided man who he hopes will find some peace of mind in prison.